Okay, so this, I'm assuming this will come up in your topic this year. How many of you are taking U.S. history? Not in a while. That's interesting. Okay. No one's taking U.S. history? We are? Racine's? Okay, good. Does what count? I'm sorry.
Civics.
Civics? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, civics is going to focus more on the government. So I don't know if you're actually going to talk about imperialization that often in civics. Maybe you would. You probably would in U.S. history. You definitely would for world history. Took it freshman year. Okay, so it has been a little while for some of you. Well, but at least that tells me that you have some background in it. And I really enjoyed reading some of your comments that you posted in that discussion. I am going to pull that up really quick and then share the screen so that you guys can see that. Because I don't want to necessarily recreate some of the I don't know if you want to call it a debate or the discussion that's happening online, but I do want to bring in those points. I'm enjoying it so far. I like that it seems kind of even between the two sides. So imperialism, there's a lot of debate around whether imperialism has been helpful or if it's been hurtful. And so I gave you two quotes to pick from. Can everybody see my screen now? You're good? Whether imperialism has been helpful to other countries or if it's hurtful, if the intent of imperialism is to help others who live in different cultures to have more freedom, or if it's really about the greed and the selfishness of a larger and stronger country. Using the two quotes provided, please answer the following question. Which of the two passages do you find to be more true? And like I said, a lot of you, it almost seems like we're kind of on the fence. But just between those of us that are here, when we're talking about imperialism, which I mean, that is when we go to other countries, and again, this is all about language. I mean, language is so central when you're talking about the humanities. The word choice that you use can shape your perception so quickly, whether we talk about we're going, visiting other countries, or if we're invading other countries, right? It's the same action, but the associations are very, very different. Are we helping these people, or are we here to take them over? And I think maybe you could say it could depend on the situation, but that's what makes it so debatable. I mean, when you hear of suffering that's happening in other countries, or when you hear of a political fallout, do you let those people work it out on their own, within their own culture, within their own laws, within their own structures, or is it our, some people say it's our duty, it's our responsibility, or is it an opportunity to move in and take control? What are your thoughts?
I feel like sometimes both.
Tell me more.
Well, when you have people together to overrule like a government in a way, like they can do that, but that is also hard. But when you have another government that comes in to help, that's more power for the people within that, what would you call it? That imperialistic, I don't know. What would you call it? I don't know. Just that group.
The other people within that country, that other culture or other nationality?
Yeah. They have more power to overrule what the imperialists are trying to do for them, or, well, for themselves, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when you have other government officials come in to help the people impeach the imperialists and their greed, that they could finally have liberation in their country and culture.
Mm-hmm. I think those are good points. Larissa is bringing up it can be considered selfish because a lot of the time we only help countries that have resources we can use. And I think that raises a really interesting point. When do we choose to move into another country and when do we choose not to? Because we have moved into other countries to help them with their different political causes, but we haven't in all of them. There are still a number of countries that are struggling with very, very violent civil unrest right now, and we're not doing anything. We're sitting back saying, not our problem, that's for you guys to work out. So at what point, where do you draw that line, right? I think that's a very, very fair question, or a very fair point. And then from the Racine's, I think that if you go to a country and overrule them, you're taking away their freedom that they earned. Right, and so then we start talking about that definition of freedom, right? I mean, we have as Americans what freedom looks like to us, but does our definition of freedom have to be the definition? And that these are all incredibly complex issues, right? That's what makes it so highly debatable, even for our governments right now. I mean, this isn't just something that we talk about academically speaking. This is a very real world problem. But I appreciate the opinions that are shared. I think it's really important for all of you to start actively voicing those opinions now. Some of you are of voting age, or you're really close to being of voting age. And that's really important to actively participate in those conversations. What I would like to see more of, though, some of you did it, but not all of you, is I want that why. When you start saying that, I think we're there to, it is about idealism. We're there to help educate. We're there to help liberate. Why do you think that? What have you heard? What have you seen? What are some examples that you can think of? The more you can explain yourself, and I did actually hear some of the replies going, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about here? Can you be more specific, right? I think that's a good thing. The more you can prompt each other to do that, that's when you actually start having really thoughtful and beneficial conversations. It's not just people sharing their opinion and everybody nodding going, okay, well, that's for you to believe, right? I think that's appropriate sometimes, but I think really healthy dialogues prompt, tell me more. They prompt, well, tell me what you're thinking of. Natalie is saying, but if we invade or take down ISIS, we run the fear of it being replaced. Just because you take down a few doesn't mean it won't stop. Just a very, very valid point, right? You can take care of it in one arena or one area, but can you do that all over the world? That's a very valid point. And then on the flip side, if you know that you can't stop it around the world, do you just let it do its course, run its course and do its thing? That I'm right. I don't have the answer to those questions, but again, really valid point. I think that's really worthy of conversation. So I hope to see you all more actively involved in this discussion, but also elaborating. Tell me more. Tell each other more. Right. Explain yourself, but also prompt each other's thinking in a respectful way, please. That's something we want to keep in mind as well, because the hard part with online discussions is we don't necessarily get to see nonverbals or hear tone to know if someone is being encouraging or if someone is being insulting. So you do want to be careful of that. Any questions about this topic of imperialism or any of the assignments that we're doing with that? Because we are going to be working, I think I sent that update, we are going to be working on diction and tone, the assignment that is due for today. It's a really long assignment, but it's long because I wanted almost to kind of do part of it for you so that you could see what I was looking for. But hopefully that'll be more helpful if we go through it in person. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to that assignment?
I don't.
Awesome. What I highly recommend if you're on a computer, if there's a way for you to pull up this assignment as well, or to have a Word doc open or a Google Doc or a sheet of paper with writing utensil, because what I'm hoping is that by working on this assignment together, you may actually be able to complete it today, turn it in today, or feel like you're in a much better place with that assignment that you could turn it in tonight or tomorrow morning. So I want this time to be useful for you and productive as well. So that's where I encourage you to participate in the conversation and to work together as a class, but I really want you to be able to work on your assignment at the same time as well. That's my goal. So I'm going to pull this up actually on a Google Doc so that I can write out our answers. So that's what I have here. So this is an assignment that's due today, or it's assigned for today, technically due tomorrow. Diction and Tone in White Man's Burden. These need to be in quotes. So White Man's Burden was written by a very famous author named Rudyard Kipling. Do you guys recognize the name? Does that sound familiar? No? Okay. Rudyard Kipling, very, very famous author. This is actually one of his more famous works, but because it was very controversial. I mean, you then ended up with other variations of white man's burden that told a very different perspective. You ended up, and that's where you ended up with brown man's burden. It was kind of the author's rebuttal to white man's burden. Like, well, here's another way of looking at this, right? Sparked a lot of conversation and a lot of debate. And so all I gave you were the first 3 stanzas. If you are curious, you're welcome to read the whole thing. It's really easy to find online. It's a long poem, but that's okay. There's a lot there. It's very deep, very, very, for lack of a better word, I think it's very meaty. There's a lot to break down and a lot to work with, a lot to discuss. But we can still get a lot done just by looking at the first 3 stanzas. So just to remind ourselves, connotative diction. First off, I hope you've realized that, again, I keep emphasizing diction because it's the word choice that people use and the word choices that we use as speakers and writers that does a lot for the messages that we communicate and how those messages are perceived. So that's why we do so much analyzing diction as well as tone. And so we will be working more with tone today. And I do have a resource that I can share with you that'll hopefully help your conversations of tone, with tone. So if connotative diction can be used by an author to evoke specific emotions in his or her audience, that's that perception, right? Those emotions lead the reader to understand the tone or the attitude the author has towards his or her subject. Below are the first 3 stanzas of the poem called White Man's Burden, which supports imperialism. His diction reveals his support, and the emotions associated with the words shows his attitude towards imperialism. As you read, note how the perspective of the speaker influences what the speaker has to say about imperialism or colonialism, okay? So here's what I wanted to show you. Here's the poem. You know, how many of you have been able to work on this assignment yet? Because I didn't plan on reading it, but if you haven't worked on this yet, then you probably, I haven't yet from Natalie. Okay, let's read it then. Let's read this. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye bred, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught, sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, and 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hope to naught. And I did provide some footnotes so that you could see what these words meant, right? And especially these last 2 lines here. Very powerful, right? Sloth means laziness. Heathen means godless, which some people associate with, as far as connotations, can associate that necessarily to mean evil, but by definition it doesn't. But socially, that's how it's been used. It doesn't say what folly means. You know what folly means? Excuse me, I'm sorry. You guys know what folly means?
Like a mistake.
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes folly is used to describe play, but we put those 2 definitions together. It's when mistakes happen from being mindless, being careless, or being immature, not paying attention to different things. To bring all your hope to naught. What do you think that means? To naught.
Bring it to nothingness.
Yeah, good. So what is this line saying then about people who would travel to other countries to work with other nations? What's this last line tell you?
That their hope would kind of be just distinguished by the others.
Or extinguished? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're okay. No, good. That's how we improve our vocabulary. Yeah, you got to play around with it. Exactly. So I mean, even though this poem does support imperialism, there is still a pretty negative tone going here, right? Because it's still being critical. But is it being critical of the people that go to these countries to work with these other nationalities?
No,
Who's it being critical of?
the people who run those nationalities.
The natives. The natives of that country, exactly. So consider the word burden, right? Because this is about diction and tone. So we already know as students, if we're going to working on an assignment that's on diction and tone, we're looking at language and we're looking at the attitude. Tone is attitude. We're looking at the attitude that is created by that word choice. So when we're analyzing diction, I just picked the word burden because that's in the very first line, right? It's even in the title of the poem. So consider that word burden. In order to analyze the intended effect of that word, you have to consider the following things. So this is sort of a cheat sheet, maybe? You call it that. 5 steps that we as critical thinkers use when we're trying to analyze diction. And this applies for everything and anything, guys, not just poetry that was written 100 years ago. I mean, this is stuff that you can look at when you're listening to political speeches, when you're reading advertisements, when you hear things on the radio, or you read essays on Huffington Post, right, or online, or things that are posted on Facebook. This is what we, as critical thinkers, this is what we do when we're looking at the words that people use and what their intended effect is, what they're trying to do. Okay, look at that context. What are the circumstances surrounding that word? How is it being used? What's it meant to describe? Because that context is so important. Then there's what that word actually means, right? The denotation of that word, the literal meaning, but then there's the associations, that connotation. And I don't know if you remember me saying, and I'll stand by this argument, I do believe connotation is much more meaningful than the dictionary definition. I think socially, those social implications, what those words do to us and do for us, is more memorable and will have a much stronger impact than what a word actually means. And I go back to that very first poem we read at the beginning of the year. I think My Papa's Waltz is an awesome example of that, because when you look up the dictionary definitions of some of those words, it creates a very different perception. However, the context of those words had a strong effect on a lot of us. So I think that's why it's always good to, when you're thinking critically, we have our emotional responses to stuff, but when we're thinking critically, we got to look at the facts. We got to look at what these words actually mean, but you can't ignore those emotional associations, because you could even argue the author is choosing those words because of the emotional associations. And maybe that author wants us to feel certain emotions, and that's why he or she used that diction, right? It's a little manipulative, don't you think? But that's how persuasive writing is. I mean, really, to be persuasive and to make an argument and to make a point is a little manipulative, because you're wanting people to see your side of the story. You're wanting people to see your argument from your eyes and your perspective. Then 4, the emotions that the author wants you to experience because of that word, right? So then start talking about those feelings. And so then what do you think that effect is? What does the author want the audience to think or to feel or to do? What kinds of connections does he want us to make? So I pretended like I was a student, okay? And so I wanted to analyze this word burden. So I answered questions 1 through 5 just for the word burden, white man's burden, okay? So number 1, burden is being used to describe what white men have with them, what these white men have to carry, okay? So the dictionary definition of burden is that which is carried, it's a load. However, the connotations or associations with a burden suggest something that is heavy and troublesome, that must be carried not by choice, but by obligation or force. When we hear that word burden, when I hear that word burden, I think of something that weighs you down. It just holds you down. It could be physically, but I would say more emotionally as well. And sometimes those emotional burdens can do more to us than the physical burdens. So then number 4, burden evokes emotions of exhaustion and pain, something that causes us to struggle. That's those are the emotions that came to me when I think about those connotations. So for number 5, the effect. So what effect would Rudyard Kipling want by calling it a burden, not something else, okay? So using the word burden to describe what white men are doing makes the audience think that white men are not participating in imperialism because they like it, but because it's their duty. A burden is not something we see as a good thing, but is something we all must deal with in some way. We connect imperialism to this idea. So notice, right, I talked about the effect, like those associations, but I had to connect it back to the topic, right? And that topic is imperialism. We connect imperialism to this idea that it's a sense of obligation that moves them forward, like it's a form of self-sacrifice for them to leave their homelands, to live among others, to help those that they believe need it. They're doing it for a greater good, okay? Now this takes us to tone, okay? So this is the second part of the assignment. Tone in a piece of text is not established by the author's use of one word or image, but by a pattern. We start looking for consistencies. That's what I mean by pattern. When you have a word and it gives you one kind of impression, you want to ask yourself, okay, am I going to see that again? Is this consistent, or was that like a fluke, or is that just for that one scene, just for that one instance, right? So so that's where that pattern comes. It's not established by the author's use of one word, but a pattern of diction, imagery, figurative language, and other stylistic devices. Once you've established the effect of that one word, look to see if there are other words or images that establish that tone. So that's where it's like, okay, I'm getting this sense of obligation and self-sacrifice for the greater good with that one word. Let's see if I can still see that. So in stanza 2, Kipling uses the phrase, in patience to abide. Well, again, let's look at diction, right? Patience means without complaint or irritation. And we associate patience as being virtuous, something that we should do. It's the trait of a good person. Abide, what does that word mean? It means to tolerate or withstand. Well, okay, so then what do we associate abide with? Someone who's faithful. I've heard that term, to abide, with someone who is being faithful to a parent, or someone who's being faithful to an adult figure, to authority, okay? So it's someone who is faithful and strong, who endures the circumstances, whether positive or negative. So based on those 3 words, we can make an assertion about the author's tone, and this is the final step for your assignment, okay? And I gave you a little sentence stem. Based on the author's name or speaker's name, based on so-and-so's use of diction, the writer or speaker's attitude towards the topic, the subject in that piece of writing is, and then I talked about tone, okay? So here's my example. Based on Kipling's use of diction, I'm gonna move this up so you can see it. Based on Kipling's use of diction, the writer's attitude towards imperialism in White Man's Burden is respect and admiration. That's what I want you to do today. But what I thought could be kind of confusing as you look through this assignment, I mean, we're talking like, what was that, 2 pages? When you look at that assignment, all of a sudden there's all this thinking happening and all these descriptions, and you're like, wait, so what am I actually supposed to do? And then the assignment shows up here at the bottom. So I did want to clarify that. So here is your assignment. I want you to follow those same 5 steps, the 1 through 5 that I have posted way up at the top. Follow the same 5 steps from the analysis above to complete complete a tone analysis of Brown Man's Burden by Henry Labouche. So now you're reading a different poem. This poem, and that's what I'm telling you right out of the gate. This poem was written as a rebuttal. It was like, okay, Rudyard Kipling, that's how you feel about colonizers, and that's how you feel about people going to other people's countries. Here's a different perspective. And he made that very clear by calling it Brown Man's Burden, okay? So I want you to select 3 words from the first 3 stanzas of that poem to analyze how diction reveals Labouche's attitude towards imperialism. And then you're going to finish with a 1-sentence claim that reveals his tone about the subject, just like I did up here for White Man's Burden. Just like this, okay? Would you prefer to do this as a class, to read through it together? Or do you think you could do this on your own? Oh, wait, sorry, there's comments. I missed that. Failure? Oh, is that for Racine's? Is that a word that stood out to you for addiction analysis? Sorry, guys. I hate when I share my screen, I can't see the chat button. I have to like move my mouse. Just want to make sure I'm not missing a question. Racine, what were you wanting to tell us about failure? Natalie, that's a good question. I'll get to it in 1 second. Mm-hmm. The word folly. Yep, I can see that. Yep, when you are making that mistake, we associate it with messing up, which can be, depending on how bad it is. Yeah, that is sort of like a failure. I would agree with that. So Natalie, what I want you to do is to answer the first 5 questions about the poem for Brown Man's Burden. So I'm going to scroll back up to those 5 questions. Whoa. Right here. You're going to answer these 5 questions about 3 words. Now that's what makes this assignment kind of weighty. Notice there were 5 steps there for 1 word. I did all of that for the word burden, okay? And then the next part, you're going to want to look for other words or phrases that you think have that same assertion. So when the assignment asks follow the same 5 steps, you're going to select 3 words from the first 3 stanzas and analyze how that diction reveals Labouche's attitude towards imperialism. And I think once you get started, those 5 steps will probably get a little bit easier. And you could even write each of those 5 steps into 1 paragraph. So you'll have a paragraph for each word, but you need to do all 5 of those questions for 3 words, okay? And then using those 3 words, that will help you come to a decision about the tone. How would you describe the author's attitude in that poem using those 3 words? And then that will help you come up with that final sentence. You know what I'm going to do to make this easier? I'm going to cut and paste. So I'm going to take these 5 here and I'll move it down so that you don't have to keep scrolling back up. I'm glad you guys are asking these questions. So here's the first 5, okay, for all 3, and then oh, sorry. I forgot. It doesn't like me using my mouse. Please let me know if this is making the assignment easier to understand. Wait, it won't let me do that. Or if there's something else I can do to make it easier to understand. I appreciate, Natalie, that you said something. And now I'm going to take this. Let's see if it'll let me copy and paste it to right. Actually, I'm going to copy and paste that down here. Oh, there it is. I already did it. Good. Oh, there it is. I should have scrolled down. I'm better than I think. I already did it. Good. So you're going to want to answer these 5 questions for the 3 words in the poem, and then make an assertion. That's it. Well, I say that briefly. That's it, but that's a lot of critical thinking. Okay, that is a lot of work. So, do you want to read the poem together as a class? What can I do to help you with this assignment? Here's what I'm going to do. Please let me know if, I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second so I can see all of you. Please let me know if you want to stick around and work on this assignment together, because we can do that. But if you feel okay, like you can do that on your own and you're all right. Oh, okay. No, you're good. If you think you can do that on your own, I do want to move on to your next assignment, the cultural criticism of Brown Man's Burden and White Man's Burden, and talk about that, because I think that assignment needs some explanation as well. But if you want to stick around to work on that assignment together, we can do that, okay? So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to share the screen again really quick, because I want to show you the assignment that you're going to do next after this. So you're going to do diction and tone in White Man's Burden and Brown Man's Burden, and then A cultural criticism, because that's actually the theory of the week, right? What cultural criticism is, as opposed to reader's response, cultural criticism is when you are able to a certain extent, criticize or look at where a writer is coming from based on who's in a position of power, okay? So there are two different cultural groups portrayed in each poem. The subjects of the colonial rule, the natives, right? And then you've got the rulers or the colonizers. So I want you to consider how each group is portrayed in each poem. So after reading a portion of White Man's Burden, what did you learn about the cultural values of the colonial rulers? So based on how the colonizers are portrayed in White Man's Burden, what can you tell about what they value? What's important to them?
Their land and their culture.
Why do you say that?
Because they don't want another government coming in and overruling that to change it all.
Except we're talking about the rulers. I totally agree with you, but you're answering number two.
Oh.
You're talking, no, that's okay. It's really easy to get these terms mixed up. So that's not uncommon. So I do want you to pay attention to that. You're talking about the subjects. Those are the subjects of the rule. They're the ones that are the natives that are the ones who are being helped or who are being taken over, however you want to portray it, right? However you want to see it. But in White Man's Burden, does Rudyard Kipling portray it as those natives being taken over or those natives being helped?
As those natives being helped.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, especially when we look at that last line, right? And that's why I wanted to break that down. When we look at that last line, what he's pointing out is that you're going to do all of this work. Oh, okay, Larissa, yep, yeah, don't leave yet. Yeah, I want to go over this first. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. My train derailed. What was I saying?
I don't know.
We see that the colonial rulers in White Man's Burden are trying to help them, but will the natives respect that help? Are they going to honor that help and keep up with the traditions they're being introduced to or not?
I don't think so.
No, yeah, his language and his tone at the end, that's where we talk about that folly, right? Due to their own folly, all that hope is for naught. You go into how to help these other people with whatever it is that they're suffering from, and they will not be grateful. They will hate you for it, and they will go back to their old ways anyway, and it won't even make a difference, right? Things along those lines. So, but because of that, because we can see in White Man's Burden that those rulers want to help, what does that show us about what they value?
The worth of a culture.
Okay, and what do you mean by that?
I guess by helping a culture be more liberated, they can make a better impact on the world as well.
Good. So they want to make an impact. I think that's very fair. They value making a difference in the world, that they value sharing their values with other people. Because I think the Racine's comment is really valid here when it takes away their freedoms. I think then we start working with that definition of freedom. How do you know if you're free? What does that freedom look like? Well, based on White Man's Burden, those colonial rulers wanted those people to share their same value of freedom and to have the same type of freedom that they experience and to have the same benefits of their culture that they have. So then it would be about finding words or phrases from that poem to show what they valued and to show how they felt and to show what their perceptions of the world are around them. But then we also talk about the subjects of that colonial rule. So how do the subjects feel?
Angry, right?
Do you hear anger from them in the poem?
Oh, no.
That's just it. But that's what's so important to keep in mind is that we're looking at this sort of kind of from the outside, but that's with cultural criticism, you're looking at how cultures are portrayed within that piece of writing. And you have to ask yourself, okay, is this going to be an objective portrayal or is this portrayal going to be biased? Is it going to be kind of swayed to their opinions of these people and their perceptions of these people? Maybe not how they would perceive themselves, right? So let's go back to that poem. That's brown man's burden. Let's go back and look at white man's burden. Think about, so now let's read through it again one more time, but think about how the subjects are portrayed, the natives, okay? Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye bred. Now, I'll actually say, I'm going off topic, I'm changing it, but when they say send forth the best ye bred, how does that portray the colonial rulers?
Rich.
That they're the best of that population. Yeah. I mean, pick any country you want. Okay. You want to talk about the US, right? When we send people over to another country, we are sending our best and our finest over to help those people. Okay. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. So how are the natives being described here?
uh, like we're an evil thing, like an evil entity.
Mm-hmm. As if they're animals. Okay, good. Yeah, that they're evil, as if they're animals. How so? What language is standing out to you? I'm hearing that from Larissa and from Brittany. So what words in those few lines? Racines, I'm hearing you're confused. Can you ask a specific question about what's confusing? Because I wanna help that. But for Larissa and Brittany.
I would say devil, the word devil, and sullen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we go look at the footnotes for sullen, what's it mean to be sullen?
Moody and
sulky. Yeah, what's it mean to be sulky, to sulk?
Just kind of like when you say something to somebody and that person just rubs, like just it goes one ear and out the other.
Good. So maybe they act apathetic, like they don't care. Or it can even be pouty, like you act like you're depressed or you're down. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be doing those things. Mm-hmm. Good. But I think that when you're talking half devil, half child, this is a very powerful phrase right here to be referring to these people as half devil, because think of the connotations that come with that term devil, right? But also for me, half child comes to mind too, because are they only working with children?
No.
No, but yet they're referring to all of them as children. Why? What would make them seem childlike?
I suppose the way that they try to help another country. Like, you know how children are always giving and they don't know when to stop? Maybe that's how they're kind of viewing it. I don't know.
Okay, but we're talking about the natives are childlike.
Right.
So Larissa's saying they're different, it's unusual. Sure. If we think childlike, we associate with children that they're innocent, right? They don't know right from wrong. They don't know any better. Maybe primitive. I like that, Natalie. Yeah, when you're talking about, what do you mean by primitive? I think that's a really good point. Because a lot of times with children, we also associate how educated they are, right? Or how knowledgeable they are. And if they don't seem very knowledgeable or don't seem like they know much, as well as they seem very innocent and very inexperienced with the world, then they will seem childlike. Yeah. So when I'm looking at those words and phrases, and Racines, you're saying the people in the poem seem confused. Which people, the natives or the rulers? Because I think that's really interesting. So maybe they're primitive, like their culture isn't as advanced, or maybe it is, but compared to our culture, it could look like that. Totally, I agree. And so in being primitive, by not having the same advancements or technology or whatnot, the natives are confused. Sure, when we were referring to that word sullen, is that where that came up? like they're not really sure what's going on or how to accept or or be able to relate to what's going on. Definitely. But what main point here, guys, notice how we had to use evidence, because once we went back to the poem and really looked at the word choice and really looked at what those words mean and the connotations behind it, then we can start making some educated analyses and we can start really answering those questions appropriately. So that's where I'm strongly encourage you, as you're answering these questions, to be sure to go back and look at the poem, right? That's why I'm asking, so what words or phrases show what they valued, how they felt? Even by using that word, the best ye bred, right? They value the idea of going to other countries and helping other people. And they see it as a help, which is why they're sending their best, right? Their best teachers, their best doctors, their best soldiers, even if it's about trying to create a new type of order, if they're worried of civil war or worried about the violence that's happening within a community. That's what they're going to do. Then how are the subjects portrayed? Well, yeah, that phrase half devil, half child is really powerful. Even using that word sullen, right? That right there portrays the subjects of colonial rule. They act like they don't really want to be there, or they act like what, this help that is being offered is a burden to them. It hurts them. They don't want to have anything to do with it, right? They're ungrateful, maybe even, depending on your perspective. And then looking at number 3, what did you learn about the cultural perceptions of the colonial rulers in brown man's burden, right? And then do the same. And then what are the perceptions of the subjects? So since we read white man's burden as a class, right, and we were able to answer 1 and 2 about white man's burden, you're going to do the exact same thing for brown man's burden as well. Okay? But then what makes something a cultural criticism is this last question here. How do the cultures reflected in both of those poems affect your opinion of imperialism? And how does your own culture affect your understanding of imperialism? So sort of like reader response, where the whole idea of reader response is that our own backgrounds and our personalities and our past experiences, and it could even be things like our age, our gender, our religion, all of those things shape how we interpret what we read. Cultural criticism is saying your culture is going to influence how you interpret something. So if you are a member of a society that sees colonization as a good thing, that's going to be the lens that you use when you're looking at that piece of writing. If your culture does not see it as a good thing, then you're going to pick up on something very different. We also look at cultural criticism by looking at the writer. For Rudyard Kipling, we can infer, does his culture support imperialism or are they against it? Crickets.
Against.
Rudyard Kipling wrote White Man's Burden. No, his culture supported it. He saw he said, yep, we gotta be careful with that. He saw those rulers as trying to do a good thing, and that the people there did not respect that, nor were they very grateful for it. Brown Man's Burden is going to show something very different. So I will say, I'm throwing a lot at you right now. I wanted to try and front load this to kind of break this down for you. Wanted to get you thinking about it because a lot of you haven't gotten this far yet, which if you were actually working on these assignments, I think this would be easier right now. But you're not quite there yet, so that's okay. But this also gets the ball rolling. Hopefully the conversations we're having today will help you formulate some questions or help you figure out what's confusing. And so then if you need help, hopefully reaching out and asking for help will be a lot easier. So, and we just covered 2 assignments in 40 minutes. We did that longer one, diction and tone, and now we're talking about cultural criticism. So there's a lot happening here. What questions do you have for me about the assignment? Or either assignments, or the poems? Okay. So wait, someone spoke up. None. Thank you, Noah. Okay. On that note, if you feel okay, you just need work time, you need to go, do that. We're good, we're done, you're welcome to leave. Thank you so much. If you need help or you want to go through some of this together, question by question, let's do that. You're welcome to stick around and we can do that together. That's up to you. So for the rest of you, have a great day. Thank you so much. Thanks, Noah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for scenes. Bye, guys.